that couldn't make it. Welcome everybody to our third Thursday, which has to be some kind of exciting moment for all of us. I'm delighted to see everybody. It's lovely, especially for those who can pop on. Marguerite and Jess, and Judy. It's good to see everybody's faces. Steph and Kristen, Rock and the Frederick Douglass in the background. Very, very distinguished, very serious. So, you know, the idea in starting Third Thursdays was just to give everybody an opportunity to talk more frequently, given the various crises and constant changes that we're all facing. And I think they've worked really well for that purpose. So I don't want to try to impose too much structure on this kind of thing and take away the value of open discussion that we were trying to create with it. But we did want to sort of at least give a couple of topic areas, the first of which is everybody should have received now the national board's sort of thinking on virtual competitions at a national level, what our rules preliminarily would look like, what our initial thoughts on some competition structure elements are, and our reasoning behind that by way of the executive committee is sort of, here's what we were thinking when we said X, Y, or Z document. So I think it probably makes sense to just open discussion for anybody who has questions or thoughts about those elements. I do want to stress no decision has been made with respect to whether nationals will be in person or virtual. We're hoping to have the flexibility not to have to make that decision for some time yet, and to let all of the sort of facts on the ground develop before we make any kind of moves in that direction. But, you know, as soon as we're reaching that decisional point, we'll obviously be communicating with you. And, you know, we're watching the same news reports and seeing the same things in secondary education that everybody is. So with that said, you know, we wanted to create a model. It's not a perfect model, and it is a model that's designed for a national competition of champions that may not fit every state, particularly those with significant digital divide issues and those, you know, who need to account for a wide range, a spectrum of talents and abilities to adjust to virtual. But it's something. So we thought we would start with that, with, you know, sort of questions, discussion, anything like that, and then sort of turn from there. You see John Wheeler from Iowa is here. You know, the Competition Operations Committee is in the process of doing the same thing that Rules just did, but for the administration of a competition. And in our efforts to be as useful to our membership as we can, we wanted to make sure we're not missing the big questions that you have about the competition operations side while we think about that. So once we've had a chance to talk about rules and cover anything that you guys would like to cover in that regard, we're going to throw things over to John to sort of solicit from you what are some questions that you're having about running competitions. We'll get feedback from everybody to everybody else in the same way that we always do with our Third Thursday conversations, but it'll also help to inform, you know, the documents that we eventually produce, you know, sometime right around Labor Day, with respect to competition operations, both what we're planning to do at the national level for our COPS changes, and then the same kind of document about what we're thinking. So with that as prologue, thoughts about rules? Questions about rules? Anything?
So I thought that this is Kristen, I thought that they were really, really good, and they made a lot of sense to me from when I judged the competition out of Utah in May, which was amazing to be able to do, to give me some you know, insight into how it's going to go for New Mexico, because we have already made the decision to do virtual competition. In fact, our school board, our local school board last night decided schooling was going to be virtual through the entire semester. Maybe they'll go back in class in January, maybe not. So, so the mock trial teams will have to practice virtually according to our public school system. So it just kind of works out for us. But I thought that the rules were consistent with what what the Utah rules were, which I thought were really, really good. And we actually have a board meeting this afternoon, so I have integrated national rules into our local rules so that our board can look at it and vote on it and talk about it. But I just wanted to say I thought it was really helpful, and thank you so much for doing that.
Yeah, I agree that they are very clear and very helpful. This is Pat Kwan. I gave me lots of issues to go to my committee with.
Paul?
Go Doris.
Hey, this is Doris in Nebraska. I just had a question, just so I understand it, but on page 5, what was the thinking on the team rosters? Why for an in-person competition, the roster would be official at the close of the on-site registration, but if you're doing it virtually, it's the day prior to the first round. I just want to understand what the thought process was behind that, if anybody can shed some light on it.
Sure. That was actually one of the uncontroversial parts of that rule, so I'm glad we're starting with that. There's no on-site registration, right? There's no table to come to. So we just were like, okay, do we want to create a rule that says we're going to have a new practice, or do we just want to set a time? And our thought was, we'll just set a time. And since the pin exchange usually starts around 6 p.m. or so at the site the day before the first round of competition, Thursday, pin exchange evening, Friday, first round in the morning. We just sort of tried to be like, well, even if there's no pin exchange, roughly when that would have happened. And it fit within our general scheme of, try to keep the rhythm of the tournament the same as much as we could, even though it would be virtual. So that was the entirety of the thinking.
Then my follow-up question would be, because I know at one time there was discussion if there was potentially a hybrid of nationals where you had some in person and some virtually. So that's what I was trying to think through in my mind, how this impacted the teams. And maybe your answer's the same.
And I'll when rules was looking at it, we kind of took the approach, let's assume it's one or the other. And then if we have to go for a hybrid, we can try to figure that out, a little bit closer to it, because the issues involved in hybrid for a national competition are even more goofy, because you would have to have a host that could have technology in the courtroom that would allow the connection of the virtual team to the courtroom in a way that they could hear them and present. And, I don't know whether you'd need multiple laptops. And so we sort of, a less charitable way would be to say punted it, but we thought, like, let's cross that bridge when we get to a situation where A, the board decides it would prefer a hybrid, and B, we've confirmed with a host that they don't think that that's absolutely nuts and that they want a binary choice. So we focused on the one or the other.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Right.
Doris, this is Cynthia from South Carolina. I want to also add that it's helpful to make the rosters due the day prior, because it takes a while to load all the rosters on the website so that your judges can access them. And so you want to allow yourself time to be able to get all that loaded correctly.
Right. No, I understand it. I was thinking more of a hybrid and was trying to think through all of that. So Paul's explained it. I appreciate it.
Gallagher from Oregon. I was just going to say thanks, first of all. This is huge, and that this week, or not this week, last week, all the weeks are the same. Last week we debuted our rules, which are very similar to what the Nationals Committee has put together to all of our teachers and coaches, and it went really well. No one flipped their lid, no one had a heart attack. So I'll say that it was very well received. They all understand the position we're in of having to try and figure this whole thing out. And a lot of the things that I thought maybe they would be concerned about or not understand, went by without any worry. So they were more concerned that they want more time for openings and closings, which has nothing to do with virtual. It just has, that's what they want in the world. So, so I'll say that, I was nervous about debuting the rules just to see what they were, going to say or think, but it went really well. And I think that we've got a lot of folks who are very understanding of where we are and what we're going to have to do this year.
I have a question about the technical issues and losing teams. And how do you feel we can best work with the schools on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the $64,000 question, I think, for all of us in our capacities as folks who are involved with state competitions. And it was, one of the flexibilities of the national board in writing its rules as opposed to states in writing theirs is we can presume a certain degree of technical capacity, or at the very least, the ability to acquire that technical capacity through working with a local law firm or whatever for a national competition if you're the state champion. And of course, if you were going to have to pay to fly to Evansville and stay for many nights, there's a little bit more that we get to assume as a national competition. I know we in Pennsylvania are looking at, can we partner with firms? Can we partner with Comcast? Can we try to figure out, ways to park a mobile hotspot? But there's a lot of variation that we're seeing in Pennsylvania, being a large geographic state and a fairly diverse one in terms of its geography. There are going to be problems that are affecting our urban schools where they can't even come into the school building, where many of our rural schools, they'll be in the school building and you can sort of rely on a school technology base. But I think it would be helpful to everybody to hear what people are facing in that regard and how you guys are approaching it, because I think that at a state level, that's what we're all worried about, right? We're worried about the access for students. We're worried about a digital divide, and we're worried about losing the teams, especially the teams that are less well-funded, who are in many cases the teams we're really trying to reach and the students we're really trying to reach. So let's make that a broad question for everybody, sort of separate and apart from the rules. How are you guys thinking about and approaching the question of access?
Well, for Delaware, I mean, I get an impression from the teachers that the technology was available in most cases. Now, downstate, we have issues just in terms of availability of networks and so forth. Less in Wilmington and, bigger areas. And I guess we'll just have to talk to our coaches and see what we can do. I don't think we know that.
Yeah, this is Daniel from Delaware as well. And just following on to that, I will say we actually sent out a quick survey for interest and what resources both the schools and the attorney coaches had. And I will say, surprisingly enough, or maybe not surprisingly at this point, but a large number of the attorney coaches have indicated that they have stuff that they can actually help coordinate with the schools to make it available, to make it a little bit easier for those schools that may need some help. So that was actually something that was useful to find out. So
yeah, that's great. Yes.
From the rules perspective, the one thing that we did was we suggested that idea that you don't need a screen for every student. You just need a screen for the 3 people who are participating at any given time. That's just sort of, that doesn't address the bigger digital divide issues, but from a rules perspective, just understand if you say like each student will have their individual device, that's a major statement of, it's going to limit the access for everybody, because I mean most students have a cell phone, but even so, you know, there are definitely going to be issues with Wi-Fi connectivity and stuff like that. So as you look at the rules component, think about how many screens you want people sitting in front of, and that's the number of stable internet connections that you actually need, and it establishes a baseline minimum. It's not much, because it also means that if you're sharing, those people are all going to be, you know, potentially within 6 feet of the air that the other person breathed a second ago, you know, when they're swapping out. But from a rules perspective, that's one of the reasons we went that way instead of having the other thing. But other than surveying, is there anybody who's been able to sort of make headway with affirmative steps to help with the digital stuff in your states?
Daniel, you've talked with some folks, haven't you? Danielle, this is Pat.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't made a huge, I actually just finished a 2.5 week fully virtual trial in the Southern District of New York last month. So I got some experience from that. The one thing I will say, it is significantly harder the more people you have in any particular room, the harder it is to try to coordinate everything, just because you've got, you start having issues with feedback from multiple speakers and whatnot. So I don't think every student necessarily has to have a connection, and you probably don't necessarily want them all to, but they do have to be, they probably do have to be in separate rooms when it's going on. Like, you don't necessarily want the attorney and the witness in the same room, because you're gonna create technical issues there. But we use Trial Graphics for it. They've handled a lot of depositions and are starting to do a lot of trials. It's certainly not cheap, but they can manage all of it, and they also have equipment that they can send out to people for people that don't have equipment and whatnot. So that is, I think, an option depending on how things shake out, and if we can get them to donate some stuff, because they will also help with making sure that they can find places for internet connections and things like that as well.
Daniel, what was that again? What was the name?
Trial Graphics, TRIALGRAPHIX.
Thank you.
No problem.
You know, from time to time, Trial Graphics has presented to our judges or sponsored a mug that everybody got or something at nationals. So you know, that they have some history of attempting to sort of pitch their products to our mock trial judges, who are the attorneys, of course, and will pay for them in the future through coming out with us at the national level. I don't know if they've been as involved locally.
I will say the results were polled, so that the 22 or 28 votes, we had 16 saying that they're definitely going virtual this spring, and 13 are still yet to decide. So I think it's more states than last month when we asked have already decided to make the switch to a virtual competition in the spring. So in that far out. What was the cause of going ahead and deciding now? Because in Georgia, we're still in that, haven't decided yet. And I don't want to decide too early or decide too late, but what were some things that made people go ahead and make the call to switch to virtual?
Michael, this is
Kristen.
Carrie.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Go
ahead, Carrie.
We decided to go ahead just because everything is just so chaotic right now. And I know for sure that I can plan an online competition, and I don't know for sure that I can plan an in-person competition. So I went with what I knew I could plan.
Okay.
That's the same for Oregon. We, as an organization, Classroom Law Project is the greater organization. We knew that we needed to make a choice so that we could plan our semesters. And when we were still in the we don't know what's going to happen stage, we couldn't plan anything. And so we made the choice to go virtual. I also, almost all of our schools here have gone virtual this term and are anticipating they might do the same in the spring. So I am finding it hard to imagine that I'm going to be able to put 500 people in a building in February and March. I just don't see
Right.
that happening. And so, and if it by some miracle did, I'm still not going to do it. So we just decided we're
Right.
going virtual. We can do that. We can plan for that.
Okay.
Yes.
For us, it
Yeah.
was-
I think it's so risky health-wise. Yeah.
For us, you know, we in Pennsylvania, we had large parts of the state that were like, we thought it might be fine. But the pinch point for us was courthouse space. You know,
Mhm.
our thinking was, you know, many of our courts, I won't say most, many of our courts don't even have criminal jury trials next yet. And we're going to be asking them to take 25 people minimum. I mean, just dead minimum, right? Like one teacher coach, one attorney coach, and the team members. You're going to get to 25 with your judges really quickly. And say, yeah, we want you to just expose your courthouse to this particular potential super spreading thing for no compensation multiple times throughout cold and flu season. And we thought to ourselves, no court's going to let us do that. And so if no court's going to let us do that, how much are we really losing once you've lost that physical, you know, dramatic experience? And we thought, okay, well, you know, now with the health and everything else, it made sense to make the announcement. And our feeling was, we wanted to make sure that every student in the state, and we have 300 teams or something, had the same rough experience. We wanted everybody to kind of get the same out of mock trial. So once you're looking at that, then your least common denominator for risk in February is almost absolute. And like Carrie, we had a concern if we plan to do this physically and have to pivot virtually because that's the world, or if you have to pivot the night before because that's when some kind of a breakout happens at a school or in a region. I mean, you're buying yourself into planning every week that could change your entire competition. Whereas if you decide virtual now, you lose a lot of that wonderful, you know, togetherness, but you at least are buying yourself into one set of planning that you can do for the year. And whether that was noble or lazy, we chose the one set of planning.
Yeah, I can tell you in Delaware, we talked to the court, the administrative office of the courts, and they basically just said, look, there's no way you're going to have 500 people in a courthouse in February. It's just not going to happen. So that sort of made the decision for us as well, because we're not going to have the space, so we kind of have to do it virtually at that point.
And with the courts, Daniel, saying that, that's from a health standpoint or from just we're going to be so busy we don't want to even deal with that?
No, it's actually from a health standpoint. So
Okay.
The courts have put out their restrictions of here's how our phased reopening is going to go and where we think we're going to be at any given point. But by February, they're like, at best, we're going to be at 50% capacity. And that means we're just not going to have 500 people that can come into the courthouse to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, this is all these Delaware people chatting about. If you look at your,
We can barely hear you.
oh, okay. Let me see if I can speak up. The issue too is if you only have 20 people.
Still can't hear.
No.
I'm just gonna. I'll send my name to Daniel.
Is this Chris? Hey, Chris, your sound far away or something.
You could put your question in the chat, Chris.
Well, we're kind of reaching a nice neutral neutral space in between the potential chunks of the hour. So maybe we want to turn things to John a little bit for a little bit of a competition operations update, since we're kind of beginning to talk about, you know, what are your space availability and how are you planning to get this and how are you making sure your teams have access, all of which are sort of part of that part of the field. So John, do you want to say a few words about how CEOPS has been approaching things when you haven't been hacked by Russians or blasted by derechos or whatever other great ill misfortune has impacted Iowa this week?
It's been a year already. Yeah, so I'm working on a draft right now of kind of guidelines or best practices for things to think about when you're running an online competition. Most of it will be repetitive from things that you've already investigated or things that you've already talked to other people about, but at least it's collected in one form. The idea is we get this out and then work on specifics for the competition operations for a national competition once we've got, once we have more time. But I thought it was important to get this kind of general document out before Labor Day, when we're starting to do kind of seat of the pants planning. And so that in that regard, just to make sure that we're going to include things that you actually care about, I'd like to hear what you care about. Are there specific issues or questions that you would like addressed in that document? Or do you want to wait for the document and then see what's missing?
At no surprise to anybody, I'd rather give my opinion now.
Always happy to have it.
I mean, I had a list of things, but I don't want to dominate. All right, I'll go.
Yeah.
So here's the things that I had on my list. I think in particular, anything about forms, like anything specifically would different ways we would have to use our forms in an online competition. And I think that's particularly true with scoring. But also things like, are there any things we need to add to the code of ethics that are specific to an online competition, or is what we have currently workable to cover that? My second one was staffing. I think for some of us, if it's possible, it would be great to bring on some sort of technical person, sort of like what they had in Utah. And it would be good to be able to go to my organization with some information on who that person is and what role or function that they might serve in an online competition. I mean, I know enough technology stuff to be dangerous, but it would be great to be able to bring somebody who's got more expertise than me on board. I also have, it would be great to have a checklist of technical equipment that you think is a minimum that people will need, and then a troubleshooting guide for how you deal with technical issues during the competition. And then spelled out steps and procedures for before, during, and after an online competition. And then my last one is just advice on how to prep teams to participate. Advice, I think, especially for, this is new for everybody, so we're all kind of wandering around in the dark, but it'd be great to kind of come up with a list of things that we could give to teams.
So some of those things are already included in the draft, but others can be easily included. Some of it may require more discussion, but I'll look for ways to try to answer some of those within the document.
Yeah, we may have to do some duplication. I mean, I think some people will be more interested in looking at, like what are the technical materials that we need, a checklist of technical materials and technical staff. And, we're going to have a whole thing where we need to deal with the technology. So we may want to be looking at that.
So question, this is Doris in Nebraska. Has the board discussed the possibility of bringing on a technology expert like what Carrie referred to for all the states to potentially, I guess, maybe use as a consultant or to help us through our state competition?
We've certainly talked about it. I mean, I think that the concern is that most of us are doing our state competitions at the same time. And I think that there's just a concern that there would be no group, one person or even small group of people who could do it all for all 46 members. And then you get into a resource situation. But we have referred to the Communications and IT Committee the question of, is there more that we can do, and what's the form that more that we can do ought to take? And we've added, we're grateful that he agreed to it. Jared from the Utah competition, we solicited and then accepted his volunteer response to our solicitation to join that committee. So we're trying to bring, you know, at least folks who have the experience of having been the tech side people running that. If there's some way that we can support, we're really interested in doing that, and we're trying to figure out the mechanism. But we are concerned that if we say, you know, we've got a person, and then there are 46 people calling that person, like it would actually be affirmatively worse than not having a person at all, because then people would be really needing that help.
Yeah.
And so we're looking at a lot of different options on that. We're amenable to allocating resources to the problem, at least conceptually. We just have to figure out how we could do that in a way that would actually get you what you guys needed and also wouldn't kill whoever that poor person is that we would hire.
So Paul, I just want to bring up one thought that might help. I don't know. I guess it depends on when everybody's holding their competitions, what exact week they're starting. If there would be a way that even like in December, if like we could have some training, I'll just say in Nebraska, I've got a really great IT person. She knows Zoom, but she's also learning a lot about it. If we could have some training to help us and maybe even go through the first trial, that would be huge, at least for our state. I would imagine other states might feel the same. I wouldn't envision, hopefully, that we'd be able to figure it out after that first trial run and be able to move forward. I'm not saying there wouldn't be glitches, but do you see where I'm coming from?
Absolutely.
I would really like help that first time. That would be great.
I'll just stare in the direction of Michael Nixon, chair of the Communications and IT Committee, with the cold, dead eyes of the chair who's throwing ideas at him.
So the only point I would just make real quick about that is just we're not sure what different platforms people are using. So I'm wondering if a training, you know, sure, some people are going to use Zoom, some people might use this trial thing, some people might be using Teams. I mean, I don't know if we can anticipate everything that, you know, the different states would be using. But surely we could anticipate at least one or two platforms.
Right. And I want to just sort of respond to a couple of the things that have been poked up in the chat box, which is doing great use. In response to both to Jess and I think to a comment from somebody else as well. You know, one of the things that we're considering at nationals, if we go virtual this year, would be whether to require teams to have a scrimmage. You know, a ton of the teams scrimmage anyway, so it's not like you're asking them to do something that they wouldn't be willing to do. But it's at least an idea that we've thrown out there in the rule setting is, do we require teams to have scrimmage so that they've done it at least once? I think that we were leaning in the direction of that's not the worst idea anybody's ever had. Liz has a great question about recommending handling observers. You guys noticed that we put in a goofy sort of new set of rules with respect to scouting and videotaping, and that this really inspired us to look at that question. And the reason for that is because we think that those two questions will travel together for most folks. Right? Like it's very hard to tell parents that you can't be there unless you can tell them, but you can record it and you'll have a copy of it that you get to watch with your kid later. And this is another one of those areas where nationals it's a little bit easier because it's a weekend and we can make rules and they only have to wait a weekend. You know, they may not be willing to wait 6 weeks or 8 weeks, but definitely I think I would be curious to see from the group, what are people thinking about observers and their role in all of this? Not because Zoom or the tech platform can't handle it per se, but because of the additional layers of complexity of those people, getting them into the right rooms, popping them in and out and all of that from a CEOPS perspective.
This is Gallagher from Oregon.
Yeah.
We've chosen to do what they did in Utah and to have a limited number of observer logins allowed per team. And so we're allowing 3 per team that they can divvy up in whatever way they see fit. We're staying out of that and letting the teams decide. They'll never be allowed to be on screen or to have audio. They're muted and blank the entire time. But that's up to them. We've also beefed up our ethical code that if we find out anybody is scouting or using those observer logins in ways that they shouldn't, and I reminded all of our coaches that kids talk, that they're disqualified, period. So there are no questions. They cannot participate if they're breaking that rule. I'm aware that you're limited in the way that you can police some of that when you're virtual, because I can't see the people, but we have made it very clear that if we get wind that this has happened, you're done. And none of them want to be disqualified, so they are very, I think, serious about following those rules. But yeah, that's what we've decided to do. Limited number of observers divvied up among teams.
Hey, Jessica,
Yep.
would you mind sharing your beefed up ethics code with us so we can kind of see what the language is? If you want to email it to me, I can then bounce it out to the, or if you just want to email it to the state coordinator's email address, that's fine too. Either way.
Absolutely. Ours is, sorry, my dog is going crazy. Ours is short and sweet, but I'll send the language to you so that you can see.
John, would it be fair to say that what CEOPS committee is working on is a plan that nationals can use in May if we're virtual, but also put out there as kind of a best practices for states to adopt. So the plan that works for nationals may not necessarily fit every individual state's competition, but it's a place to start that states can then take and go from.
Really haven't gotten into the weeds yet of the specifics of how CEOPS will operate at a virtual competition. It's more general things to think about, best practices, general principles. If you're planning a virtual mock trial, here are some things that you need to consider with some recommendations. And the first recommendation is that since schools everywhere are comfortable with Zoom, that we pursue that. Schools know how to use them. We all will very soon know how to use them. There may be some other legal specific platforms, but those are going to be difficult for most of our users, who are the students and teachers and their coaches. So, the first specific recommendation is use Zoom. And then here are things that you need to know about Zoom based on the Utah competition, some college competitions, and some law school competitions. So it's more of a stream of consciousness. Here's things we need to think about. Once that's out, we can start looking specifically at, okay, what do we need to accomplish for a May virtual competition, in or virtually in Indiana.
I don't want to let Kristen's question go, and so I want to address it, and then we can sort of pop back to different tech platforms and stuff. Kristen had asked, when do we intend to make this decision, and do we intend to account for school districts that won't let their teams travel? So the first part of that is as late as possible, but there are limits on that. Indiana needs to know, and so I think we will be discussing a pretty clear timeline at our October board meeting and getting Indiana's information on when that is. What we've heard preliminarily from them is that as we come into the new year at the latest, it's really helpful for them to know. much more helpful for them to know in January than it would be for us to be making this decision in March. You know, there's a lot that goes into the decision. It's not quite as easy because there is a host that has already invested so much in the preparation for a physical competition and everything else. And so we have to be really mindful of that. And you know, so we're gonna be working closely with them. But the reality is that decision may get made by Indiana state authorities at some point in a way that defines our decision anyway. You know, if Indiana state authorities start telling them, look, there's no chance we're letting a competition happen here, and their local health department is saying absolutely not in December, you know, we may just have that decision made. We have committed that Evansville will be our host, whether we are physically in Evansville or whether we are in virtual Evansville. But as you can imagine, you know, a lot of the activities and fun things that are planned in physical, if you have 3 months to plan, we might be able to figure out ways to replicate at least some of that part of the fun part of the Nationals experience. And so, you know, we're really going to be working very closely with them on both the timeline and the substance of it. And then the second part of the question, absolutely. I mean, the fact that school districts won't let their teams travel, you know, is a critical factor in how many teams we could have, right? And so the number of those school districts will also help to define a decisional calculus, and it wouldn't, you know, depending on how things are going in Indiana and what the sort of general state of play is nationally, as we're approaching that decision, we're not committing to anything, but I don't think you should be shocked if you get a survey from us that says sort of like, based on where your state is now, is there 0 chance that your teams could come to a physical nationals if it occurred? You know, 100% chance you could, or where people are, and we try to figure out what the state of play is nationwide. You know, the only reason to do a hybrid competition is because some people could come and some people couldn't, and whether that's even feasible is something that we're still exploring. But you know, to be blunt, we're trying to keep as many of those options open as possible while we watch the public health situation and the situation nationally develop, and we'll make the best decisions that we can at the time, and we're trying to keep as many paths open as possible to get everybody to Evansville if that is possible, because I mean, we all love nationals, right? That's why we're all here. We all love that experience. But we're also highly
I think
there's a lot of there's a lot of steps between now and everybody being able to get together at nationals, which we may or may not be able to bridge. So that's our big picture.
Right. Thank you.
This is Pat from Delaware. I just want to encourage the decision to be made early, so that our planning and so forth can go on. And, you know, I just can't see folks being willing to let their kids travel. I may be wrong, but I just can't see it at this point.
I have a question to that. How many states how many states need to know before the end of the year about the format for nationals because of budgeting or other kind of things? Is there anybody who needs to know by a certain date because of a budget request or something?
No, I don't have those issues, but it's just where people's heads are.
I talked about that with our director, and we decided that what we were going to do is budget it as though we're traveling in person and we're paying for traveling in person. It's easier to not spend the money than to not have it in there. So that's how we're going to approach it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how New Mexico approached it too. We just put it in the budget that we're going to be going to nationals and pay for a team to go. I mean, you know, and on that, since we didn't use the money that we had in our budget last year because nationals was canceled, we went ahead and bought 100 Chromebooks with that money. so that we could give those to students. Even though the school districts are giving out Chromebooks, if there are students, other students who need them to use for mock trials specifically, since we are doing it virtual, that's what we use that money for. So
Now, I remember in the Utah competition, there were issues with kids on Chromebooks connecting to the Zoom call. I don't know.
Well, I don't think we're not going to be using Zoom. I think we're going to, I need to learn Google Classroom or Google Meets, because those kids that are going to be using the Chromebooks that were given to them from the school district will not be allowed to download Zoom.
Okay.
That's why, I mean, I think trying to have one platform is not going to work, because so many states have made different decisions about what platforms they will use and which ones they're not.
We've run into the same issue. The Portland Public Schools, the largest one here, has decided that, well, they're saying for now that their students can't participate in anything outside of Google. I think they're going to change their minds pretty quickly, because that eliminates lots of things for their students that they normally participate in. I am familiar with Google Meet. I can't run a competition on that platform. So it's going to have to be something that's more robust, like Zoom, in order to do all of the things that we'll need to do for a competition. So I've not encountered the school district yet. I anticipate that that's coming, but I'm ready to make the argument that there needs to be an exception for these students. So.
Gotcha.
And just as a fallback, I know it's not ideal, but if there's some sort of block on their school computers and they don't have another computer to use for Zoom, they could always use their phone or someone else's phone in the family as a fallback. Not ideal.
This is Ellen from Michigan, and not mock trial, but when we were doing some pretty intense competitive policy debates and we had the need for school laptops, we did probably a little bit of what was discussed above, which was seek additional laptops from the school that had different capacities and that didn't require us to log into the school district computer. And then we put that particular software that we needed for those competitions on that piece too. So a suggestion I might have is some sort of official looking letter that says, here's for the national competition, here's what we're using, and here's what we're not using, here's what we are using, and here's why we're using it. And that just might be another tool for teachers or for state coordinators to use to justify their own decisions in their state. It may or may not be useful, but I found that was really helpful in a different but similar situation.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Have I lost people?
No,
hello?
everyone's just in thinking silence right now. Everyone's here.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, that's the problem of doing this a telephone connection, is that you don't know what's happening, but it's all right.
I think everybody is just sitting here thinking really hard about the giant weights that are being piled on our shoulders, and trying to figure out how we can help one another out, and what other questions we have. So I do want to make sure we have that time for open questions, open concerns, new business thoughts and things before we wrap for today.
I have one question. Are people reducing the registration fee for the coming year based on the fact that you're going online only? And if so, by how much, or maybe how much of a percentage of a rebate?
Daniel, didn't we decide to not reduce registration fees?
Correct.
Okay.
And can you walk me through your thinking?
I mean, part of it was they had been consistent for a good long while, and we just raised them last year. And so we don't want to, I think the fear is if we cut them, then getting them back up after having not raised them for about 10 years is going to be problematic. And also, I mean, I will say having done this, for a trial, just a single trial, which is a lot less complicated than trying to get a bunch of schools and doing things. There's technical and logistical stuff that you're going to have to deal with, and I think those costs can add up remarkably quickly.
Yes.
And I mean, our registration fees don't cover but a portion of the competition in general anyway.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, we're going to have other costs that, will appear that we're going to need to have that money for.
Pennsylvania essentially made the same decision. It's been flat for a while. We felt like it was important to keep the consistency. And we also thought, if there's any year that looks like it might need rainy day funds, 2020 has been awfully wet.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, but I mean, there's just going to be unforeseen things happening, need that cushion.
This is Ellen again, and I'm curious if you're doing anything or thought about some sort of thank you for judges, or how are you doing, or how do you start to plan about your volunteer recruitment differently, your judging recruitment? Does it change anything about your volunteers or who you reach out to? And then are you doing anything different to prep them? So I'm even thinking thank you gifts. Like, is there something else that you might be doing differently in the scope of judges and volunteers?
This is Pat, Delaware. I haven't thought about that. I don't know. Daniel may have, and Chris. I don't know. It's a good idea.
So this is Laura from California. We haven't really talked about it either. I know traditionally we have cards that students leave on the bench actually it's for the judges who allow us to use the courtroom, but there are virtual cards so that teams can sign virtually and we can send off to volunteers. So that's something we could consider, but we haven't really thought it through.
Mm-hmm.
This is Susan. There's a program called Kudo boards, and you can create all kinds of messages on them and send them out. We've been using those to reach out to our volunteers as well as interns, staff members, whatever. It's just a really cool program. It's free for small usage and then really cheap for bigger groups or whatever, but at least it's something.
What's the title of it again?
I'll put it in the chat. It's called Kudo Boards, KUDOBOARD.com. And you can invite people. We did it and had everyone, when the new board members came on, we had the old board members and staff welcome them. So it's just a way that everybody can add they can add pictures, words, whatever they want. And it's just everyone's been very appreciative of them.
Good. Nice.
We haven't really chatted about thank you gifts. I'm actually very optimistic that we can cast a wider net in a virtual competition, because most of the no's I get, they could be just them saying things, but they say they can't get to my regional competitions on a particular day or whatever. And now we're going to provide a whole range of judging opportunities, at various times and on various days, we have now in place a requirement that teams provide a judge for each round that they participate in. But in recent years, we've provided waivers left and right because we know that, especially in some of our rural communities, we have a county in Iowa that only has 2 attorneys. And so if there's a school there, they're not going to be able to get one of those people to come to judge for them. But if we go virtual and we cast a wider net, there's no reason why those schools shouldn't be able to find someone virtually. They don't have to judge at that particular trial. In fact, we don't want them in that particular trial. But if they choose any trial within that week or two, then that would fulfill the requirements. So instead of carrot, I guess we're using sticks. You haven't thought about thank yous yet, but we are going to press teams to help with that judge recruitment, and hopefully we'll have an abundance of judges.
Our regional coordinators who do our regional competitions will be not running a competition this year because it's all virtually done and centrally administered. So I've asked them to ramp up their recruitment. So that's where I'm really going to rely on them, particularly in, like John mentioned, those rural areas where they know their people and who volunteers better than we do in Portland. So I think that's, I'm going to have to ramp that up. We're also anticipating beginning much earlier and getting commitments from judges early on so that they have time to make that choice.
I think a benefit too of doing it virtually is that if you run competitions kind of on weeknights as well as the weekend, you're going to catch people that can't be somewhere on a Saturday, but they can sit at their office later on a Tuesday night, much easier. So I think you're going to get a wider net, like John mentioned, of people, but be able to get them in easier, and also kind of break up the home field advantage of the same evaluators seeing the same teams in the same region year after year after year. Now you can really spread them out across the state.
It also makes it a lot easier to deal with conflicts. If you have a conflict with a region, I can just dump you in another region and I don't have to worry about it, rather than figuring out particular schools and teams within a region. I can just move you completely to a different region. I don't have to be distressed about your conflicts as much.
Good points.
And Michael, you raised something that I have had a question about too, or what people are thinking about, is that in the virtual world, have you found that after school, during school hours, still on Saturdays, have you all had some thinking or changing of thoughts around when you're holding your various competitions?
Ours would be after hours. We're not allowed to do anything organized mock trial during school hours, practices, competitions, that kind of thing. So I would envision that any rounds that we do during the week would all begin at like 6 p.m. kind of thing. And we haven't made all the decisions as the format with everything, but my idea was to just have a gigantic all swim super regional where all teams are competing against each other. And we just randomly assign 4 rounds for each of the teams. And I just put them on a schedule spread across 3 weeks or so. And then judging panel members that sign up for those, I just plug them into those rounds and everything. At least that's where it is now. We really haven't gotten too far with it. But it'd be, most weeknights, and then we can hit a couple on the Saturdays of that as well, just to kind of knock them out. But eventually get everybody washed through like 4 rounds of the preliminary style competition and go from there.
That we were thinking the same thing. I would love to see if you've got a calendar about how you're organizing that. Would love to see that. We're doing it. We're thinking about doing it over a 6-week period, and just people have to complete their 4 rounds within that time frame. But lots more opportunities to sign up than just an all-day Saturday kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Carrie, are you doing like a super regional and then state finals, or just one big statewide tournament with some elimination along the way?
We haven't quite gotten there yet, just because because we have, we don't really have a ton of teams. We're sort of thinking in this year that we would open up state to all of the teams as long as they participate in the 4 preliminary rounds. But we'll see how many teams we get signed up and what we're biting off, because I'm just not sure yet. But
yeah. It sounds nice and easy and great now, but when it really comes down to it.
Sounds like fun in August.
I was going to say I'd be willing to share my schedule as well. Mine is similar in that we're doing it over 3 weeks on Tuesday and Thursday, late afternoon, evening, and spreading the regions over that time, mainly because to administer that many trials at once. We don't have like some of you with 300 teams. I would tear my hair out, but we have enough that having 15 trials going at once would be tricky. So I'd be happy to share my grid that we're using for ours.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, well, we're coming up on the hour, and I don't want to blow past it, but I also don't want to cut off any discussion. So if there's anybody who had anything else that they wanted to throw out there for right now, let's speak now or forever hold your peace.
At least until next month, right?
Yeah, but the next part is me talking about next month. Okay. Well, it looks like everybody's had enough exhaustion and enough thinking about the terrible things that we're all plowing through this year. We're going to do this again next month on the 3rd Thursday again. Anybody who has topics or specific things that you want to throw out there, feel free. It's Thursday the 17th at 3 p.m. I think we're probably going to lead off the next meeting with John Wheeler doing the same thing I did with rules at the beginning of this meeting, and talking about COPS and what the COPS guidance was that was out there and other things that were considered, taking questions and all of that. And then we'll move to a more open forum. At some point, we will get back to fundraising. Don't fear that we're gonna leave that topic behind. I know that was originally going to be our first topic, but we've just found so many topics that needed to be covered just to get through the year, that we've been focusing on those. And as soon as we run out of those, we'll pivot. But don't ever feel like you can't just email any one of us. Susan Newsell reminds us all that the 17th is Constitution Day. That is appropriate. It would be great to see you on Constitution Day. However, if there is a groundswell of people who are like, dumb, we are the legal education coordinators for our states, we're all busy on Constitution Day, we can make it a 4th Thursday or if we need to, in order to give everybody breathing room. But for now, we'll keep it 3rd Thursday. Really do feed back to us. You can write to any of us on the national board, but especially to any of us, Michael, me, Sean, and Susan, we're the sort of officers. If any topics, anything that you guys want to discuss, anything else, and don't hesitate to continue to use the state coordinator listserv to ask questions and to share information. And I suspect at some point we're going to stage up a whole area on the website that's just panicked thoughts and documents relating to virtual competitions. And it's really helpful to get all this feedback and to get everybody's input into everything. And this is working out great, and we thank everybody.
I'm assuming that since you're here, you got the emails from the state coordinators listserv. Has anyone not been getting those? Paul sent them out this morning. I followed up with the Zoom information and then with the phone call numbers. And there was a few last week with the rules from Paul. Has anyone not been getting those? All right, everyone's getting. And hopefully we got Sheila figured out.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you, everybody. I'll see you guys in a month, if not sooner.
Bye, everybody.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you. Good to hear from everyone.